Hi, you, Francis here. Just thought I would jump on and give my 2 cents worth in relation to Wicca, a guide for the solitary practitioner, largely because someone has asked me what my opinion is of it. Now, this copy is 92, I think. It's the sixth edition or printing of the book that originally came out in 89. It was hugely popular at the time because it allegedly gave insight into the practices of Gerald Gardner and Alexander's, the Gardnerian Alexandrian teachings, or so people thought. And even today, when people refer to Wicca, Scott Cunningham, they usually mean Gardner. And hate to be the bearer of bad news, there's completely different things between the two areas of Wicca, witchcraft, whatever you want to call it. I fall into the camp where my tradition of Wicca probably more aligns with the Gardnerian Alexandrian branches, even though I have a sort of sus initiatory connection. But it's the teachings and what's come through there that makes a difference to what is classified as Wicca. Now, Gardner very rarely, if any time, called his practice Wicca. He always called it, if anything, they were of the Wicca. He didn't align with paganism very much. I know today Maxine Sanders doesn't call herself a pagan. She's a witch, full stop, end of story. And when I was sort of going through the motions, I was sort of classifying myself under the pagan umbrella, largely because it was a nice catch-all. But things change, and so do opinions. As I said, there's a lot of disinformation these days that solitary Wicca means Gardnerian or Alexandrian witchcraft, and it doesn't. Do I recommend Scott Cunningham's book? I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I'm of the view that you should read widely, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But where it falls into what category really depends on what you're wanting to get out of it. And so, because someone asked my opinion, as I don't know what they are hoping to achieve. They did say that they've read my book, and by that, I'm assuming they are talking about contemporary witchcraft. So thank you. I still don't really understand what you're trying to achieve. As I've mentioned in contemporary witchcraft, to me, the craft is a mystery cult or mystery tradition that you need to actually practice to experience the mysteries. You can't be a bystander. It doesn't happen that way. So to understand the god, goddess, the energies, working magic, building circles, connecting with the elementals, and the sense of space and time with your land, which to me isn't paramount, you need to do that through experience, not through the pages of someone else's words, which is probably detrimental coming from an author. But you need to actually get out there and start doing your own practice. Is Scott Cunningham a good place to start? I don't know. I mean, back in the day when it did come out, it took off. As my copy is only about 3-4 years after the first edition, and it's already into the sixth printing. So that says something about how popular it was, that it actually tapped into a space needed. However, my book, Self-Plug, talks about how to set up a sacred space, cast your circle. It's got a basic ritual in there that you can start working from. If you are interested in what my first book on witchcraft was, it was this book, Wicca, an Old Religion for a New Age, Vivian Crowley. This book now has at least 2 different covers, I think. It's maybe called The Old Religion in the New Millennium or something like that. I don't know if it's moved on there. But Vivian Crowley is an Alexandrian, even though she calls it Wicca, because back in the, I think this is an 89 publication as well. Yeah. Back there, the words witch and Wiccan were interchangeable, and also we were still dealing with the negative stereotypes of witch. We still are today, so nothing much really has changed, but a lot of witches at the time, and by that I mean Gardnerian Alexandrians, were actually classed themselves as Wiccans, and I know in America today, a lot of the more traditional Wiccans, Gardnerians still do. That's why we've got so many different labels and interpretations. When someone says that they're a witch, or they're talking about Wicca, especially if they're slagging Wicca off, it's just like, what exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about Scott Cunningham's Anything Goes, as long as it's directed by his books? Or are you talking about Gardner? Or are you talking about something completely different? Even Vivian Crowley. Now, the reason I like this book is that she's a psychoanalyst or a Jungian psychologist. I think she is a psychoanalyst, not 100% sure. But she comes from a place of, okay, cast a circle. This is why, how, what we're doing, and the reverberations of when you put your finger out or your hand out or your wand out or whatever you're using, a piece of wood, your thumb, and you cast your circle around what's going through your mind, what you're visualizing, what you're focusing on, coming out from you into the item that you may or may not be holding, and then what is the train of thought or energy and where it's going to. That's why I really like her book. And out of all the books today, there's still not a lot that go to the detail that she does in the book. And this is probably why I still recommend her book, my reading material. She sort of inspired how I've sort of gone into a little bit of detail as to why you're doing it, because that's how my brain works. If I'm sticking my finger out and walking around in a circle, I want to know what I'm doing. Otherwise, you're just sticking your finger out and walking in a circle. She talks about all the energy flows, chakras. Also talks about other things that aren't necessarily covered in other books, like the watchtowers. What they actually mean, who they actually are. So it gives you, if you're following probably more traditional aspect, or you want to find a little bit more traditional aspect of witchcraft, traditional as in Gardnerian Alexandrian influenced, that book's really good. Other books, I mean, the Querian also mentioned they had read, or they had purchased the Witch's Bible, which is a very comprehensive book. I like it because the second part of it sort of, or there's parts of the Gardnerian Book of Shadows. There's also the second part of the book, it's a combination of two books, which sort of delves a little bit more into the psychology or philosophies of the craft, which I find or believe is very important to understand, especially if you're coming from an orthodox or even a non-religious background. It sort of gets you in the right frame of mind. The first part of it is the 8 Sabres of Witches, which can be very confusing if you haven't been to Ireland, because it was written when they were living in Ireland. So a lot of it is of their land. And if you're not connected with the myths, and if you're living in the Southern Hemisphere, which I suppose my book has the leg up over, because my book is written for the Southern Hemisphere first. It is sort of more geared, again, towards probably more coven-based as opposed to solitary. And that's probably why Cunningham's book really took off, because it was geared for the individual. Another book that came out, which is still hugely popular today, is Bucky's Big Blue Book. It's another book that's gone through various reprintings. It's set out in lesson format. This is the 93 edition. And it covers a whole range of things, even down to make your own wand, a fame, and robe if you're that way inclined, sandals, the whole kit and caboodle. So it's really about putting your own energy into it. And again, he looks at the history and ritual practice, but he's sort of instructing you as a solitary level, but more deeper than what Scott Cunningham did. And Buckland, of course, was Gardnerian. Another book that I'm dragged out, which is part of my pile, is, again, it's done a reprinting of Change Publishers, and it's probably a lesser known book. Is actually Vicky Bramshaw's Craft of the Wise. It's quite a thick book as well. I like it. It's got rituals in there. It talks about a whole range of things which actually aren't covered in a lot of books these days, or you need to have a lot of books to cover this information. She also talks about the evolution of magic into the craft, which was very interesting. She focuses on the solar year. She got walk hunting or herbcraft in here, astrology, manifesting the deity within, psychic defense. She talks about the planes of existence, magic spell work, the whole kit and caboodle. There's elemental stuffs in here. Her rituals are sort of actually gained towards a more solitary practitioner. So you get a whole wealth of information. Even though she is British, it doesn't focus heavily on the British landscape compared to the Witch's Bible and the Faras. So it won't confuse you if you weren't actually living in Britain. You just, if you're living south of the equator, have to change things around for the Southern Hemisphere. So can I recommend Wicca? I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. It was sort of a memento book, or a big breath of fresh air at its time, but it has actually, in that, I should explain myself, it took what people saw was a private hidden practice and allegedly made it public. But what he actually did in truth was invent something completely different, which has, in 30, 40 years later, has caused a whole range of issues where we're seeing now, as I said, the people are associating this as this, or even this, and they're completely different things. He opened the doorway to the anything goes movement, which I'm not against, but in order for anything to go, you've got to have a foundation to base yourself on. You've got to have an understanding of what you're doing. And I've said this again, I said it in my book, Vivian Crowley has said it in a book, Buckland says it in his book, Scott probably even says it in his book, but his foundation base is according to him. Now, he was never initiated. So unlike the Faras, where they have published the Gardnerian Book of Shadows, even though they weren't Gardnerians, he hasn't broken any oaths or anything, but he's actually done what some people allege Gardner has done, invented the whole thing up, even though I disagree with that claim about Gardner. These days, there's a lot of issues which have come away from the self-styled form of Wicca. So, and unless I know specifically what style of witchcraft you are interested in doing or following, I can't recommend the book. All I can recommend is that you start learning how to cast a circle. The gods aren't going to smote you. And that's another thing. Do you believe in the gods? Do you believe in energy? Do you believe in the elements? Because all that actually affects what style of witchcraft or Wicca you're going to practice. Because if you don't believe in the gods or elements and working in that way, then I personally don't understand or can see why would you bother casting a circle where you're calling these elemental beings or higher beings in. Likewise, there's lots of debates happening at the moment in relation to following the wheel of the year. No, you don't have to follow it if you don't believe in that system. And this is what people are getting confused about, is that the 8-spoke wheel that we know today as the wheel of the year, with the Sabbaths and the equinoxes and the greater and lesser Sabbaths, yes, was put together by Ross Nichols and Gerald Gardner. Now, Ross Nichols is the founder of what's come known today as OBOD, it's a Druid order, Ovarts, Druids, and Bards. And Gardner, of course, went on to establish witchcraft or the modern revival of witchcraft. If your practice, your craft, your interpretation of things is not devotional, which was Gardnerian witchcraft, if you don't want to observe the greater Sabbaths, which are the Celtic agricultural days, you don't have to. And in fact, I don't see why you are getting stressed out about it. Ancient peoples did observe the solstices and or the equinoxes. We have monuments and stone circles and structures in alignment with these. So that's evidence that they did. These were times where they often had great processions, like at Avebury. And there's other, I think Callanish is another one, it aligns with certain either astrological or solar happenings. Stonehenge is another one, but all around the world there are these monuments that have been left today. In some traditions of the craft, they only observe the equinoxes and solstices. In some forms of magic, they only observe that. So you don't have to follow the 8-spoked wheel if you don't identify as a Wiccan, a witch, a pagan. And I think this is what's sort of coming through today, is that we're getting, I think Christopher Panczak did an article, I've seen some responses to it, about the generations of witchcraft. And it's almost like the modern generation of witchcraft, which seems to be very atheistic, is a new generation that's sort of self-taught. And as such, you don't need to then, if all your magic is focused on the here and now and operational magic, which spellcasting and that sort of thing, you don't need to follow the 8-spoked wheel at all. However, if your craft is focused more on evolution of the soul or becoming a better person, aligning yourself with a higher being or whatever, then the mythical story that's contained in the Wheel of the Year, which yes, stems from Gardner and the folk traditions that he put together, and that I think is important, but you have to know the stories that lie behind it. And in my tradition, that the Sabbath, the 8-spoked wheel, follows the journey of the god, and it's a bigger journey to that of the moon with the goddess ebbs and flows. Here in the solar year, the energies ebb and flow, but on a wider, deeper level. But that's probably a subject for another video. I just wanted to talk about this book, and I can't really, because I don't know what style of witchcraft you're wanting to do. And it's entirely up to you. And at some stage, you're just going to have to stop reading and start actually doing it. And I think that's the best bet. So those are my 2 cents worth. I hope that this offers some insight. Blessing.